In this video, we're going to be diving deeper into this attributes window over here and showing what we can do with some of these tools, in particular some of the shape tools. So as you noticed in the last video, as I select different artboards, the context of this changes. So if I have nothing selected, it looks like this, and whenever I select an artboard, it gives me a bunch of options. Basically, every tool functions this way within XD. So let's grab a rectangle tool, and I'm just going to zoom in on my start page artboard, and I'm going to draw out a basic shape. As I draw that shape out, you'll notice that there's tons of options over here. In particular, we have alignment options up top, where we can align based on different factors. So each one of these aligns with multiple objects or with our artboard. So we can center it that way and center it that way. So now it's centered on both sides, or if we wanted to snap it to the left-hand side, I could click that. So alignment options, the repeat grid, which we'll get into in a future video, and also some different transformation options like Pathfinder, basically, within Illustrator. So these will combine objects together. Below that, we have the width, the height, the X and the Y coordinate, and we have the rotation of the object, and if we want to flip the object. This fixed position when scrolling, if that's checked, if our page is scrollable, meaning that there's content that goes off the page, this will stay anchored on the page. This is good for like menu items and things like that we want to scroll with our user. Responsive resize, we're not going to get into right now. We have the appearance. This is the general opacity of our object. So at 100% it's completely opaque, and at 0% it's completely transparent. Down here we have the rounded corners. So right now we have this selected and it's at 0 because there's no corner radius, and I can either change that over here or I can type in a number. So let's say like 50, that'll be something crazy. If I hit return, it'll add that. And those two options, this option is rounding all the corners simultaneously. This one will add different corner radiuses, so each one can be operated individually. So I can say, let's do 17 for that one, 40 for that one, and I can start to create some interesting shapes, actually. I'm going to switch that back to all corners, though. So I'm going to up that just to like 25 for now. Then we have the fill. If I uncheck this, it removes the fill. If I have it checked, it has the fill. And if I click the fill, I can go ahead and select different colors and things. I can also change this to a linear gradient. Works just like the gradient tool in Illustrator that I can modify and pull around. You should be pretty familiar with these tools by now. So if I wanted to create a gradient button, I can do that. I can select the different points on the gradient and change them and how they operate. Pretty basic. Below that we have the border. So if I uncheck this, it has no border. If I check it, it has a border. Within the border, we can change the color, of course. Then below that, we can change the thickness. So size, let's change this to like 10. We'll have a really thick border. We can make the border dashed. We can also change the gap size, so it could be small dashes with larger gaps. And just put those back at 0. Then we have how the border stroke actually works. So here it's going on the inside edge of our vector path. This will move it to the outside edge, and this will move it on the vector path, centered on the vector path. Then here we can change how end caps are working, which we're not going to see because this is a closed path. But if we were using the line tool, this is going to change how the end of the line looks. So it'll either be a straight edge or a rounded corner or a rounded end or a more boxy end that goes extended past the corner of our object. Then we have how the different corners work. So this is your basic miter corner. We can also change that to be cut off. So let's just change this back to 0. And these different options change how the corners operate. Below that, we have the shadow. If I check that, it turns the shadow on. You can see there's a faint shadow now. If I uncheck it, it turns it off. The shadow can also be modified directly. So if I click it here, I can make it a different color. I can change its opacity. So this is the opacity bar. and do other modifications such as the location of the shadow, so I can make it further away or closer. I can also change how blurry it is. That's what this B value is. So if this is at 0, it's completely the same as my object, and if it's at, let's say, 50, it'll be very, very, very blurred. I'm going to uncheck the shadow for now. Then we have the background blur function. This basically treats our object as an object blurring the background. I'll show you this very briefly by drawing a new shape over our initial shape and then checking background blur. So what this does is this almost turns it into like a piece of frosted glass that we can move around and change the amount of blurriness. So it's a good way to blur background elements, particularly if we have like menus that pop up over other objects. We'll use this background blur to create some cool effects. And then lastly, we have mark for export, and this is going to be used whenever you send this off to a developer or someone else. Now, all of these tools have their own attribute window, but they're basically the same. If we look at the line tool, it's pretty much the same as the rectangle tool we were using before. We can just change a few different things on it. The pen tool works in the same way. The only one that's really different is the text tool, which is going to give us a bunch of text options whenever we use it. So we can change things like the font, the size, the spacing, if we have tracking or leading, things like that. Change how it's oriented. You can play around with these, if it's underlined or not. Very basic settings. And then we have the same options, a border, etc. So keep exploring all these tools and figure out what works for you and how you can make the object that you want to make using these attributes on the right-hand side.